Welcome to the Rebel's Edge. And today we're going to be leading off with Facebook. That's what they used to be called, but Face Plant is what they're doing today. You want to know why that and IBM are both tanking? Well, we have the answers on the Rebel's Edge. Bang! Bang.
Face plant.
Face plant. Yeah, not good. Not good. And
I refuse to call them Meta, John. I just can't get myself to do it. So for me, there's still Facebook, or today Face Plant. Maybe that turns around.
We'll see. I think Meta, it's like a meta loss, but I'm not at a loss for why they're down. I think I know why. By the way, Pete, I was just pointing to my hat to thank Kenny Dichter and the guys at Wheels Up and Delta Jets for such great hospitality that they gave us. Thanks a lot, Kenny. Thank you, truly. And Pete, a lot of people probably should be going to itsnotanoption.com because instead of being down 40 or 50 bucks in a stock like Meta today, you could have bought an at-the-money option and maybe you're only losing 5 or 10 bucks. And you got time, depending how far out into the future you did it. So why not define your risk with options, folks? It's not an option.com.
Gotta love it.
Wow. All right, Pete. Dow's down 550 points. The S&P's down 1%. The NASDAQ's down 1.5%. And we know why. Two huge stocks are tanking today. One of them that leads the NASDAQ, and that would be Faceplant. But we'll get to all that. And of course, he is Pete Najarian. I'm Jon Najarian. Let's dive into the macro minute, shall we, Pete?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, you know how I question frequently, folks, this rip-roaring economy we've got? Because the only thing we're spending to keep retail sales up is gasoline and probably airfares and maybe something else. But that's about it. People are cutting back, and now corporations are cutting back too. U.S. economy grew at a slower pace, only 1.6% in Q1, well below expectations. And that's the second consecutive quarter of deceleration. And that's not what the Fed wants, right, Pete?
You're right. And I'll tell you what the Fed wants. They want to find out what's going on with the PCE, John, and that comes out tomorrow. So even though we do our show Monday through Thursday, tomorrow we're going to see that in the morning. That should be pretty interesting. It's something that everybody talks about every time it comes around, because the Fed has said this is our most accurate gauge of the economy, of inflation, all of that. And so it's something that I think is very important. We talked about it earlier in the week, and now here we are. That's going to be tomorrow. Should be pretty interesting, and we'll see how the markets react to whatever those numbers are. And I kind of have an idea of where I think they're going to be.
Me too. Well, let's talk about fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
Well, fantastic futures ain't so fantastic today, Pete, because the last thing the market needed, other than that horrible report out of Facebook, which we're about to get to, the last thing the market needed was 4.74 for interest rates. That's the 10-year, 4.74. We are within a whisker, Pete, of the highs of the last year. And could we be pushing all the way to and through 5? Well, most of us hope not. But that is sort of the direction we seem to be going, Pete.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I would agree with you, John. I think from a future standpoint, that's what we're looking at. You and I are both looking at that because we've always looked at that and that correlation that they've got, inverse correlation with the NASDAQ. And obviously the NASDAQ's getting battered today. Part of that reason is not just a couple of names. It's also what's going on with the 10-year, to your point. Matter of fact, we hit the highest level since November of last year. I'm sure we could get very, very close to 5 if we don't watch it. I will say this. How about the 2-year over 5 today? So you look at the 2s, you look at the 10s, you hear Rick Santelli all the time talking about this kind of a thing. And Rick's been right for a long time in terms of this is important, and it's important to the markets. And folks are looking for those numbers. And if those numbers continue to the upside, that's going to not be so great for the downside for the rest of the market, whether it's the Dow or the NASDAQ or whatever.
Exactly right. Well, folks, on today's Venture Minute, we have a company that we're very proud to say we are working with. We are paid to work with them as well. And this is Rad AI. Rad AI is a technology company. What they do is they revolutionize brand engagement using advanced language models. What does that mean? AI. It's in their DNA, if you will, folks. Artificial intelligence, because what Rad AI does, and that video is Jeremy and I. Jeremy's the CEO of Rad AI. We were there shooting this at the New York Stock Exchange, and they need to understand for their clients the audience interests, and they facilitate precise engagement and content strategy. Meaning that, for instance, if you had an influencer that you were thinking about hiring, or if you didn't even know which influencer would do the best job for your product, what are people talking about? How does that direct people to what you're trying to deliver for them? Well, Rad AI does that for you. And these guys are growing like a weed. Rad AI is indeed doing a funding round right now as well. And I'd encourage you to take a look at what they do. I think it's 15 or 20 minute segment that I had with Jeremy over at the New York Stock Exchange will explain it even better. But a fabulous company, a lot of upside here, and they can not only tell you who would be good for you to use, but who would be bad. So check out Rad AI. I think you'll really like what they do, and maybe you'll choose to be a shareholder. Thank you. All right, folks, this is the coup de grace. This is Meta, META, and what a meta mistake it is.
Yeah.
And last time, Pete, that they did something like this, it's not that the earnings were terrible. That's not really what the issue is. The last time they spent this much money, Pete, CapEx spending, Meta and Amazon, whenever they do that, they tend to go down. And then when they pull it back, they tend to bounce. Well, today it traded as low as 421 after closing about 394 or so last night. And that was pretty ugly. It's traded 56 million shares to the downside. And there probably aren't a lot of people willing to jump in on this first leg down. What do you think, Pete?
No, I think you're right. I think so far people are just kind of hands off on Meta because of what's going on here. But to your point, were the earnings good? Yes, the earnings were good. The revenue was good. They beat all the expectations that were out there. So that's a very positive thing. On the negative side, people are just concerned about all of the spend that's going towards AI. You know, the initiatives that they've got. They're building so many different things, John, including their own custom chips. So they are going deep into this. And that was part of the rationale, even going back in time as they changed the name. It was no longer just about Facebook. It's about far more than that. So I look at what the guidance is, and that's where there's a bit of an issue because we're talking about lower revenue than expected. And that you and I talk about this all the time. When you give your earnings and your revenue, and that's great, that's just one piece of the puzzle. The other piece, of course, is, well, what are you going to do for me next, though? What's the next quarter look like? And because of the fact that it looks like there's going to be a lot of spend, revenue maybe comes down a bit, that's why people are concerned. That's why they turned and burned and they started selling. And that selling pressure has been very strong all day without much of a bounce at all. But there certainly is a boatload of volume going into this one, John. And I would say you want to talk about one name that's the leader on this pull to the downside outside of the 10-year. I'd put one stock right up there, and I'd say it's Meta.
Yep, I think it is Meta. On the stock side, Meta. On the futures side, well, we already talked about the 10-year. All right. Take a look at this, folks, because IBM came out with their earnings and they had a similar problem, lower revenue. So they reported earnings with higher EPS, earnings per share, but lower revenue. And they also announced an acquisition. How often do you spend $6.4 billion on an acquisition, Pete? And it's an afterthought. But that's where they buried this one in there. And you know what? I want to show you this, folks, because we're not perfect. Pete and I follow unusual activity. But in this case, I want to show you that we had both calls and puts. Yesterday, we had calls. But look at how many calls they bought, 2,500. Look at how many puts they bought 2 days earlier, nearly 9,600. So it's 3 times more on the put side. They were buying the May 170 puts. Well, I wanted to show it because, again, were there people betting on the upside with calls? Yes. But again, the volume tells the story. They were 3 times more interested in puts than calls in IBM. That is not good, Pete. And I think somebody kind of sniffed out maybe some of these EPS warnings going forward out of IBM, Big Blue.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. By the way, the acquisition is an interesting one. It's going to enhance the hybrid side of cloud, $6.5 billion. They've made some huge acquisitions over the years. Some of them worked out fantastic for IBM. Not all of them, but many of them have actually worked out pretty well. There's been some misses as well. We'll see on this one. I think this actually makes some sense, though, John, because it gives them an opportunity to get into the higher margin side of the business. That's what they're looking for. And it's to IBM. Let's remember, it's Big Blue. They've been around forever, but they've kind of gotten passed up by quite a few other names out there. So they're doing what they can do to get themselves back into the game. And I think they've been doing a pretty good, solid job with that. But with that spend and a little bit of that revenue weakness that people sniffed out there, that's kind of why that pressure is there. That's why those puts are reacting the way they are. And to your point, when you look at those calls, 2,500 of them, that's not really all that telling. 9,500 of those puts, I think that said everything. And that's exactly what happened. And those puts actually exploded pretty nice, because when you look at where that stock has dropped to today, it's definitely in that ballpark of something that could be a very nice trade.
Yeah. I mean, it was 184 yesterday, Pete, on the close. Today it traded to 165, and it's not seeing much of a bounce at all. It's at 166.50. So it's only basically a buck, less than $1 off of the low that it hit today. So ouch for IBM. And Pete, I'd say, just to throw it out there to IBM, you guys were the first with this Watson. They were the first ones really touting what Watson could do, Pete. And more or less, it was close to an AI, an artificial intelligence. They should be pushing that. Yeah. And that's perhaps what this acquisition, to your point, Pete, that'll help them for the cloud and AI. Maybe that helps them get their mojo back.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Southwest Airlines, because these guys reported Q1 earnings below expectations with a wider loss per share and lower revenue. Man, that's the triplet there, Pete, that you don't want, because when you have earnings missing, revenue missing, and perhaps that loss stacking up, that ain't what you need, especially since you're not getting the planes that you also need.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go, John, is obviously those numbers are very important. That's why we talk about them. That's why we look to see exactly where they line up against some of these numbers, earnings, revenue, everything else. But the reality is as well, how about the deliveries from Boeing? I mean, everybody's got their issues somewhere deep down with Boeing. And for Southwest, it's, hey, there's going to be some big time delays. They're also canceling 4 different airports that they fly in and out of. There's a lot going on right now for Southwest. This is a stock that's gotten hit to the downside pretty significantly, John. It's one of those things where they just can't stack up enough negative news. And so far, you and I are contributing to that, because Meta, boy, that's deep into the red. IBM, pretty damn deep into the red. And now you look over at Southwest. This has not been a very good day when you consider all of these stocks. And I think the next one, Caterpillar, don't look any better.
No. To Pete's point, folks, Caterpillar, CAT, doesn't really look any better, because that one did have higher earnings per share. Great. But the sales sucked. The sales were not good. The street not happy about that. And that's why we see this decline in the shares today. Weak economic conditions in Europe and Asia Pacific is what Caterpillar was citing, Pete. And again, I am not trying to rip any person, but I am saying that people don't tell me it's raining outside when you're pissing on my leg. If it's not really raining and instead you're just pissing on my leg, I'm going to call you out on it. And that's why I call them out when people say, oh, it's a rip-roaring economy. No, Karine Jean-Pierre. It is not a rip-roaring economy. People are cutting back spending. Corporations are cutting back spending, except on non-durables, staples. Yeah, they're spending on gasoline and food, but they're not spending on the other stuff. And if Europe and Asia are both weakening, what is Caterpillar telling you about, rip-roaring economy? It's not.
And even, John, you mentioned Europe, you mentioned the Asian Pacific markets, you mentioned all that. Even here in the U.S., I mean, the machine sales were down 1%. That doesn't happen very often for Caterpillar, and especially if the economy is so good, that certainly doesn't signify anything about that. The only areas that they really had that really did perform, though, John, was energy and transportation. When you look at that side of the business, that was up 7%. Everything else, nada. And that's been a real problem. They did kill it when it comes to the earnings itself. But basically everything they're giving us as a backdrop is, hey, look, it's not that great. We're still going to be able to plow our ways through this whole thing. But we are seeing a lot of weakness, not just across the pond, but also here. And that's going to be a problem, I think, going forward for Caterpillar. We'll see. I mean, it's down significantly today. Last I looked, John, it was down about 7%. So we've got 4 stocks up there, 4 big names up there, and not one of them's in the green.
Yeah, that's a problem, Pete. That is a problem.
Yeah.
All right. Our buddy Colin Coward, Pete, had some interesting things to say. And I know that you and I are fans, probably, pretty close with Pat McAfee in terms of how entertaining both are. And Colin, I think, since he carries his show for the most part by himself, Pete, rather than having quite as many guests and co-contributors or whatever, I'm always impressed with this guy. So take a listen to what he says on this clip.
There's only 2 players in this league that are unstoppable, Jokic and Luka. They were both great again last night. High IQ, Europeans, elite, unstoppable scores. And unlike the windmill dunk guys, they actually will age much better. They're not aesthetically pleasing. No high-flying dunks.
It's a great line.
They stay close to the floor. They move slowly, deliberately. Their game's about angles, thick body types. But the basketball culture and basketball media loves the spectacular. And we've had great players who are spectacular. Dr. J, Michael Jordan.
Thank you.
But it's this constant promoting of Derrick Rose and Westbrook and John Wall and John Morant, guards that can't shoot. This NBA is slower, deliberate with its dominance players. You can't speed Jokic up. You can't speed Luka up. They're going to do whatever they want to do. I've come to a conclusion. There's only 2 players.
Yep, that is the conclusion. Those 2, Pete. And I think Denver, it looks like I don't know if they sweep the Lakers, Pete, but they certainly look like they could. Obviously, we got the game coming up, but coming back from 20 points down, and they had no answer for the big man. No answer at all for him. And as they came back, they leaned on him a lot.
And Murray's got ice in his veins as well. I mean, that's a really good team. Obviously, they won it last year. I think they got a really good shot again this year. Although, John, Oklahoma City looking pretty daggone good. Chet Holmgren, you and I know that family very, very well, Central High School. And that kid is playing out of his mind. He's outstanding. And then, of course, you've got the Timberwolves still and Anthony Edwards in it and that whole group. So there's a lot of impressive things going on, I think, as far as the NBA's got multiple teams where you could legitimately say, these guys look like they could win it all. And I'll tell you what, I don't know if you saw last night, John, but Boston got beat up by Miami. So, that was definitely unexpected. We went into this thing. Boston has been the team all year. Miami's been kind of up and down, but they're very good. They've got a lot of talent out there. They were shooting threes like they were shooting from 2 feet away. I mean, they absolutely locked it in, and it was a really great game. All right. More importantly, we got draft night tonight, John. That should be pretty fun. I'm always excited about that. You are, because, no matter what happens, you generally walk away and you go, God, we got a shot. And, whether it's the Chicago Bears, I mean, everybody's got their shot, right? The Chicago Bears, it's pretty much lock, stock, and barrel. It's going to be Caleb, right? I mean, that's what everybody's been saying forever. I would be shocked if that wasn't the case or if there was any kind of a trade there. But after that, you and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday, there might be some trades. If they don't trade, though, you got Caleb, you've got Drake May, then you've got Jaden Daniels, and now people are starting to really push more and more for J.J. McCarthy as well. I mean, he has been rising, John, and it's pretty interesting. You know who else finally is on the rise because he was an afterthought? Penix is definitely somebody who they were looking over him, and he might slide to the Vikings. But nobody was talking about Bo Nix except for you and I. Now, all of a sudden, I look at a couple of mock drafts today, suddenly he's jumped all the way back right in there, John. Matter of fact, above Penix in a lot of different mock drafts that I'm looking at out there. Now, I just wanted to throw this out there as to why Bo Nix, in my opinion, would make sense. So, of the top 6 quarterbacks, he has the most touchdowns, 45. The least number of interceptions, 3. The highest percentage completion, 77. I mean, why is this guy not the lock, stock, barrel number 1 guy? I don't know. But the other thing is, how is this guy suddenly got a guy who might go in the high part of the second round or the bottom of the first round? Now I think reality is setting in and people are saying, hey, look, this guy can play. Bo Nix is as good as anybody in the entire draft. So why not put him up there? And to your point, Michael Penix as well. I mean, I'll tell you what, I think Penix, I think Bo, I look at a few of these names, I put them up above J.J. McCarthy and some of the other quarterbacks. I'm not a huge Drake May guy either. I like Jaden Daniels. I think he's the best of the group, but I'm not sure about Drake May just yet, John. He's big. He's a little bit stiff. He's an athlete, sort of, but, you know, he's that big quarterback who's going to stand back there with a big arm. He didn't have a great year last year, and yet he's the number 2 guy on most everybody's list. So what do you think about tonight? And by the way, 34 million people total audience last year in the first round, 34 million. There's actually numbers that show if you just took out a segment, it was closer to 55 million. So it just shows you that first round, those numbers are absolutely outrageous. I mean, and this is the draft. We're going up against NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, and meanwhile, the draft numbers are just outrageous.
They are, and they should be, because it is America's sport, Pete. It's America's game. All right, how about this? I'm going to throw out a couple players from Clemson, Pete. That's right, Clemson, because this cornerback, Nate Wiggins, a lot of people would have been just chatting him up because he ran a 4.28. But then, of course, Xavier ran a 4.21 or a 4.22 or whatever. But this kid is a burner. He had multiple pick sixes this past year. The kid, you know, can lure a quarterback into thinking a guy's open and then just turn on those jets. So he was going to be a mid-first rounder, Pete. They say he has slipped, not because of the, you know, combine or anything else, but because they worry, is he physical enough? Because he's only about 175 pounds. So that is a concern, but you can build him up, I'd say. Their big defensive tackle, Pete, 6'4", 300, 8 tackles for a loss, 5 sacks. I mean, this guy's name is Ruke, R-U-K-E. I guess.
I
don't know where you come up with that, but Ruke. So anyway, Rook versus Luke. I guess the parents just like the sound of that better, but I think that kid's a stud. And I think this linebacker, even though he doesn't have the big size that sometimes linebackers need, Pete, he's one of those guys in the middle, kind of like some of the linebackers who aren't 6'4" and 260 or 55 or whatever. But this guy, Jeremiah Trotter, man, 26 straight games he started at middle linebacker on one of the best defenses in football. That's Clemson. So I like that kid. And I'm not saying he's first rounder, Pete, but people are going to be looking at him hard because, again, he's durable and he's smart.
Yeah, this, you know, that's the fun thing about this draft is you've got all this stuff going on. We're finally here. It's Thursday, it's Friday, it's Saturday, and we're finally here. We're going to be able to see it all. We talked a little bit about the ratings. I'll give you a couple sleepers too, John. the last few years, there's a school up there by where you and I kind of grew up. Now, we were in Minnesota. We were at Central High, and you played all over the place. So did I, moving all around. South Dakota State just keeps on cranking out not just great football teams, but some great football players as well. And I thought it would be interesting to point out, first of all, they've got multiple players within the NFL right now. I think last time I looked, I think this year they might have had 11 players from South Dakota State playing in the NFL, which is amazing. This used to be Division II, then they went to 1, and they've had some great championship teams. Mason McCormick's an offensive lineman up there, 6'4", 310. Big, mean, athletic, wants to hurt people, but doing it the right way. But he's one of those guys that, when he's coming downfield, he is not going to give you anything on the side of love. It's going to be a forearm in your face. I mean, he's one of those aggressive offensive linemen, much more plays like a defensive lineman. Garrett Greenfield, another one. But they also, John, and this is the third year in a row, they've got a running back up there, this kid, Isaiah Davis, 6 foot, 220. They recruited him, I think, out of Florida or something like that, John. But in any case, he's coming out of South Dakota State as a running back, probably one of the better running backs in the draft. And the reason I say that is he's one of these guys who just doesn't lose yards. There's certain guys out there who know how to run the ball. Are they going to break it away? Probably not. He's not going to get a breakaway for a 60-yard touchdown. But you know what? He's not going to get the 3-yard loss either. He's one of these guys who's going to get you 4, 5, 6 every once in a while. Maybe he makes it 12. But they've got 3 guys right there, and they've got a few more that might not even get drafted. But I'll tell you what, South Dakota State is getting more and more represented, John, when it comes to getting players into the NFL. It just says a lot about how they recruit, what they're doing. It used to be North Dakota State. Now it's South Dakota State. And these guys are doing something right.
Yeah, they've got some great coaching, Pete. Obviously, they're able to attract talent that is probably just shy of the stuff that Nebraska or Minnesota or Iowa would normally take into the Big Ten. But now, I think South Dakota State, they're the Jackrabbits, isn't it, Pete, or something? Yep. They are beasts, and it's got to be good coaching too. And it's not just at one position. It's not just quarterbacks. Right. It's not just defense. It's, several good coaches that are probably going to be moving up into other D1 jobs because they're getting noticed that they're putting out talent.
Yep. It's all the excitement that goes into the whole draft night and everything else. And some of these guys know where they're going to most likely get drafted if they get drafted. But the excitement starts tonight. People are pretty fired up about it. I don't know about you, but I definitely will be glued in on this whole thing. I love it. I love watching all of the whole process. It's up in Detroit, so those fans will be going crazy.
Yeah. I love the New York fans' reactions when they're up in the balcony when they do it in New York. We'll have to see how the Detroit fans react. Yeah. And remember, folks, It's Not an Option is the book that Pete and I have out right now, one of the top business books of 2024. You can get it by going to itsnotanoption.com. That's itsnotanoption.com. Check it out. Free shipping. You can claim your free copy. And we hope you join us again Monday because Pete and I will be up in Detroit watching the draft. So no Rebels Edge tomorrow. See you Monday.